Come close now, child. Come real close to this fire where the flames dance like ancient spirits. 'Cause what I'm fixin' to tell you ain't light, ain't easy, ain't the kind of story the wind just carries off. This here story got weight. Heavy as chains round the ankle. Heavy as tears that fall when nobody's looking. Heavy as the sorrow buried deep in the throat of folks who learn to survive by keeping quiet. Now listen here, child. Listen good. Down in the low country of South Carolina, where the rice fields stretch wide as God's own sorrow, and the Spanish moss hangs from them cypress trees like ghosts of the hanged, there stood a plantation that the devil himself might have designed. Wexford Plantation, they called it. White as a rotten tooth that big house was, sitting up on the hill like a crown on the head of evil, watching over fields that ran red with more than just Georgia clay. Lord have mercy on what happened there. The slave quarters. Sweet Jesus, them quarters squatted low to the ground like beaten dogs. Row after row of wooden shacks with roofs that leaked rainwater and sorrow both. Between them shacks and the big house, right there in the middle of God's green earth, stood two things that made every soul on that plantation shiver when they passed by. The whipping post and the forge. That whipping post, twisted old oak it was, arms spread wide like it was reaching for heaven but couldn't ever get there on account of all the blood it drunk from innocent backs. And beside it, Lord of glory, beside it sat that forge, black iron mouth breathing fire like the very bowels of hell, where the overseer heated his branding irons till they glowed red as Satan's eyes. The air itself carried heavy spirits in that place. Even in the heat of summer, when the cotton fields shimmered like water in the distance and the sun beat down merciless as a slaver's whip, there was something cold that moved through Wexford, something that made the hounds whimper and the children wake up crying from dreams they couldn't name. Old folks say the land itself was cursed. Say it was built on Indian burial ground, and them ancient bones was restless, mixing their sorrow with ours, creating a pain so deep it soaked into the very earth like blood into cotton. The overseer, sweet Mother Mary, the overseer was a man named Jonas Blackwood, and if ever the devil walked in human form, it was him. Tall as a hanging tree, pale as bleached bone, with eyes cold as January frost, and hands that knew nothing but cruelty. He wore them black boots that clicked against the ground like coffin nails, and when you heard that sound coming, you knew somebody was fixing to meet their sorrow. Blackwood had a powerful love for that forge, spent hours there, heating iron, watching metal glow, smelling that smell that comes when fire meets flesh. The branding irons hung there like instruments of the devil's own orchestra, each one shaped different, some letters, some marks, some designs that ain't got no earthly purpose except to cause pain. That's where our story takes root, child. Right there in that unholy place where fire and flesh met regular as Sunday morning, where the sound of sizzling skin was common as birdsong, where a man's evil grew bigger every day like a cancer in the soul of the world. In the deep quiet of them quarters, when the work was done and folks huddled together for what little warmth life had left, they whispered about strange things happening. They talked about how the forge burned hotter when Blackwood was angry, how the iron itself seemed to hunger for human flesh, how sometimes at night you could hear them branding irons singing in the wind like they was calling out for blood. But what they whispered about most was the prophecy the old conjure woman made, the night before Ashley was born. Said a child was coming who would know fire like no other, who would carry the ancestors' pain in her flesh but their strength in her spirit. Said this child would be marked by iron but not broken by it, scarred by flame but not consumed. The night Ashley's mother went into labor, the forge burned all by itself. No one lit it. No one fed it coal. But that iron mouth breathed fire all night long, casting red shadows on the quarters like the very air was bleeding. And when the baby's first cry cut through the darkness, every iron in that forge rang like church bells, singing a song that sounded like sorrow and promise mixed together. In them days of deep sorrow, when a slave woman went into labor, wasn't no doctor coming, wasn't no midwife from the big house offering help. Was just other slave women, gathering round like a circle of protection, knowing that every new life born in bondage was both a blessing and a curse. Blessing 'cause it was life itself, curse 'cause it meant one more soul trapped in chains. Ashley's mama, woman they called Ruth, went into labor on a night when the moon hid its face behind thick clouds, like even heaven couldn't bear to watch what was happening down below. The birthing took place in the last cabin on the row, furthest from the big house, furthest from the overseer's eyes, where the women could do their ancient work without fear of Blackwood coming to see what all the commotion was about. Old Mama Senna, the eldest of the slave women and the closest thing to a conjure woman they had, was the one who delivered that baby. Her hands, gnarled as cypress roots but gentle as morning dew, guided Ashley into the world, while the other women hummed low songs in languages that came from across the water. Songs their grandmamas taught them, songs that carried the power of home, even in this land of exile. But soon as that baby drew her first breath, everyone in that cabin knew this wasn't no ordinary child. "Look at them eyes," whispered one woman, fear and wonder mixing in her voice. "Look how she stares." Ashley come into the world with eyes wide open, not crying, not screaming, just looking like she could see things that wasn't there, like she could see through the cabin walls to the forge burning outside, like she could see into the future itself. Them eyes was dark as midnight water, but they held fire in them, fire that burned steady and sure. Mama Senna took one look at that baby and started praying in the old tongue, words that sounded like music and warning both. She touched the baby's forehead with hands that trembled, not from age but from knowing. "This child," she whispered, her voice barely louder than breath. "This child gonna know fire, gonna know it close, gonna know it cruel, but gonna know it true." The ancestors marked her before she was born. Ruth held her baby close, feeling the weight of prophecy settle over them like a burial shroud. Outside, the forge kept burning, casting shadows that danced on the cabin walls like spirits celebrating or mourning. Wasn't no way to tell which. The other women started whispering about signs they'd seen, how the iron in the forge had been singing all week, how the whipping post had been bleeding sap that looked red as blood, how the overseer's prize stallion had been acting spooked, snorting and stamping like it could smell something dangerous on the wind. "Name her careful," Mama Senna warned. "Name's got power. This one's gonna need a name that can hold her strength." Ruth looked down at her baby girl, still not crying, still just staring with them ancient eyes, and the name came to her like a voice from the grave. Ashley. After the ashes that remain when fire burns everything else away. Ashley. What's left when the flames die down but refuse to be forgotten. As the night wore on and the baby slept, the women took turns watching over her, seeing how peaceful she looked even with all the darkness surrounding her birth. They didn't know then what they was looking at, didn't know they was seeing the first quiet moments of a child who would grow to know more pain than any human should bear, but who would also learn to turn that pain into something else entirely. Outside in the darkness, Jonas Blackwood walked his rounds, boots clicking against the ground like a death march, checking his property, counting his stock. When he passed by that last cabin where Ashley had just been born, he stopped, stood there listening to the quiet sounds of women tending to new life, and something in his cold heart stirred. Not warmth, never warmth, but a kind of hunger. He couldn't know what had just come into his world. Couldn't know that the baby sleeping in that cabin would grow to challenge everything he believed about breaking spirits and crushing souls. But something made him stand there longer than usual, staring at that cabin like he could smell destiny on the wind. The forge kept burning all night, flames reaching up toward heaven like prayers or curses. And when morning came and the fire finally died to embers, folks found something strange. All the branding irons was arranged in a perfect circle, like they'd moved themselves during the night, like they was preparing for something that was still to come. That's how Ashley entered this world, child. Born into fire, marked by prophecy, carried into life by women who knew how to birth hope even in the darkest places. Born in a time when being born black and female meant knowing from your first breath that the world was going to try to break you every day you drew air. But some souls, some precious few souls, was made to bend without breaking, to burn without being consumed. And Ashley, Lord have mercy, Ashley was one of them. The years passed like seasons of sorrow on Wexford Plantation, and little Ashley grew from baby to child, under the watchful eye of that cruel overseer. By the time she was old enough to walk steady on her own 2 feet, everybody on that plantation knew there was something different about Ruth's girl. Wasn't that she was bigger than other children, or stronger, or smarter, though Lord knows she was sharp as a blade. Wasn't even that she was prettier, though she had them deep dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets and skin smooth as river stones. No, what made Ashley different was the way she looked at things. While other children learned early to cast their eyes down when white folks passed, to make themselves small and invisible, Ashley would stand straight and look. Not defiant, mind you. She wasn't fool enough to court trouble that young. But she looked with them eyes that seemed to see right through to the truth of things. Eyes that made grown men uncomfortable without them even knowing why. Jonas Blackwood first took real notice of her when she was maybe 5 years old, still small enough that her mama could scoop her up and carry her when danger came walking. It was a spring morning, cotton planting time, when the air was thick with pollen and promise, and all the field hands was gathered in the yard for work assignments. Blackwood stood there in his black coat and polished boots, reading names from his list, sending folks to different fields like he was dealing cards in some devil's game. Ashley stood next to her mama, quiet as always, but when Blackwood's cold eyes swept over the crowd, they stopped on her. "What's your name, girl?" he asked, his voice sharp as winter wind. Ashley looked right back at him, didn't flinch, didn't tremble. "Ashley, sir." "Ashley what?" The child didn't answer right away, 'cause slaves wasn't allowed no last names. Wasn't supposed to be nothing but property with voices. But something in the way she held herself, something in the straightness of her little back, made Blackwood's jaw tighten. "Just Ashley, sir," she said finally. Blackwood stared at her for a long moment, and folks later said they could feel something cold pass between them, like winter getting an early start. Then he turned away, went back to his list, but everybody knew he'd marked her in his mind, written her name in that dark book he kept of folks who needed special attention. From that day on, Ashley couldn't go nowhere on that plantation without feeling Blackwood's eyes on her. When she played with other children in the dust between the cabins, when she helped her mama hang washing, when she sat quiet in the evening listening to the old folks tell stories, always them pale eyes watching, waiting. Ruth tried to warn her daughter. "Baby girl," she'd whisper when they was alone, "you got to learn to make yourself small. Got to learn to disappear when that man looks your way. He's got a powerful hunger for breaking spirits, and yours shines too bright." But Ashley couldn't help the way she was made. Couldn't help the fire that burned steady in her chest. The strength that come from someplace deeper than her own small body. When other children cried from hunger, Ashley stayed quiet. When the overseer's whip cracked in the distance, Ashley didn't jump like the others. She just listened, learned, stored it all away in that part of her heart where the ancestors whispered. The other slave children started looking at her strange too, not understanding why she wouldn't play the games they played. Hiding from white folks, practicing looking scared, learning how to make their shoulders shake on command. They thought she was touched in the head or maybe just too proud for her own good. Only Mama Senna understood what they was seeing. The old woman would watch Ashley from her place on the cabin porch, rocking in her chair made from plantation scraps, seeing how the child moved through the world like she owned it, like she was free even with chains waiting to claim her. "That child got old soul," Mama Senna would mutter to whoever would listen. "Got the spirit of warriors in her. Got the strength of women who survived the crossing, who birthed children in ship bellies, who kept hope alive when hope was all they had. But strength, child, strength in a slave was dangerous as dynamite near fire. And Jonas Blackwood, he had a nose for dangerous things. It was late summer when Ashley turned 7 that Blackwood made his first move. The cotton was ready for picking, white bowls bursting open like God's own popcorn across the endless fields, and every hand on the plantation was needed for harvest. Even the children old enough to reach the lower bowls was expected to work from sunup to sundown. Ashley was assigned to work alongside her mama, learning how to pick clean, how to move fast, how to keep her bag full and her mouth shut. But on the 3rd day of harvest, when the heat was beaten down merciless, and the overseer was riding his horse through the fields looking for folks to punish, Ashley made the mistake of straightening her back to ease the ache. Blackwood saw her, saw that moment of rebellion against the bent-back posture of bondage. Saw her standing tall in a field where everything was supposed to bow low. He rode his horse right up to where Ashley and Ruth was working, dust clouding up around them like Judgment Day approaching. Ruth grabbed her daughter's hand, tried to pull her down into the cotton rows where maybe they could disappear. but it was too late. "Girl," Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "You got something wrong with your back? Can't seem to keep it bent like it's supposed to be." Ashley looked up at him, sitting tall on that horse like some pale horseman of the apocalypse, and for a moment that felt like eternity, child met monster eye to eye. "No, sir," Ashley said, quiet, but clear as spring water. "Ain't nothing wrong with my back." Blackwood's smile was cold as January frost. "Well then," he said, climbing down from his horse slow as death, "reckon we need to teach it how to bend proper. That's when the real story begins, child. That moment when evil looked at innocence and decided it needed breaking. That moment when a 7-year-old girl with fire in her eyes learned that the world was fixin' to test every ounce of strength the ancestors gave her. The forge was waitin', the iron was ready, and Ashley's education in pain was about to begin. Now listen close, child, 'cause what I'm fixin' to tell you ain't easy to hear, but it's truth that needs tellin'. Truth that's been carried in the hearts of our people for generations, passed down from mouth to ear like sacred fire that ain't never allowed to die. That day in the cotton field when Jonas Blackwood climbed down from his horse, the very air seemed to thicken like molasses, heavy with the weight of what was comin'. Ruth felt it first, that mother's instinct that can smell danger before it shows its face. She tried to step between her daughter and that pale devil, tried to shield Ashley with her own body, but Blackwood pushed her aside like she was nothing more than morning mist. "This here's about education," Blackwood said, his voice soft as silk but cold as a grave. "And the lesson starts now." He grabbed Ashley by the arm, that thin little arm no bigger than a chicken bone, and started walking toward the middle of the field where all the other workers could see. Ruth followed, begging, pleading, offering to take whatever punishment was coming, but Blackwood just kept walking like death itself had places to be. Other field hands stopped their picking when they saw what was happening, stopped and stood frozen like statues, knowing they was about to witness something that would burn itself into their memory forever. Children pressed close to their mamas, and the old folks started praying under their breath in languages that came from across the dark water. Ashley didn't cry. Sweet Jesus, that child didn't shed a single tear, didn't whimper, didn't beg. She just walked beside that monster with her little chin held high, like she was walking to church instead of walking to her first taste of hell. When they reached the center of the field, Blackwood called out to his driver, a broken-down slave named Tobias, who'd learned to survive by doing the master's dirty work. "Tobias," he hollered, "bring me a switch, good strong one." While Tobias went hunting for the instrument of punishment, Blackwood made Ashley stand there in the blazing sun, made her wait while fear could build up inside her like water behind a dam. But Ashley just stood, quiet as Sunday morning, looking out over them cotton fields like she was seeing something the rest of them couldn't see. "You know why you're here, girl?" Blackwood asked. Ashley looked up at him with them deep dark eyes that held too much wisdom for a 7-year-old child. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm here 'cause you want to break my back." Lord have mercy, the honesty of that child. Even Blackwood seemed took back for a moment, like he wasn't expecting such plain truth from such a small mouth. But then his face hardened again, turned mean as a snake ready to strike. "That's right," he said. "I'm gonna break that back, and I'm gonna break that spirit, and I'm gonna break everything in you that thinks it don't have to bow." Tobias came back with a switch cut from a green willow, long and thin and flexible enough to wrap around a small body like a whip. Blackwood took it, tested its weight, smiled that cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Turn around," he told Ashley. Ashley turned, faced the crowd of field hands who was watching with hearts full of sorrow and rage they couldn't show. She looked right at her mama, and in that look was a message clearer than words. "Don't you worry about me. I can take whatever he's got to give." The first blow came down across her small shoulders like thunder crackling across the sky. Then the second, then the third. Each one laid a line of fire across her back. Each one brought a gasp from the watching crowd. But Ashley never made a sound. Blackwood kept counting as he whipped. 1, 2, 3, 4, like he was keeping score in some devil's game. 5, 6, 7. And with each number his voice got meaner. His arm got stronger, his fury got hotter. But Ashley, sweet Mother Mary, Ashley stood there like she was made of iron herself. Stood there taking blow after blow while her little dress got torn to pieces and her back got painted red with her own blood. Never cried out, never begged, never gave that monster the satisfaction of hearing her break. By the time Blackwood reached 15, his own arm was getting tired, and sweat was pouring down his pale face like he was the one being punished. But Ashley was still standing, still quiet, still looking out over them cotton fields like she was seeing visions of freedom in the distance. "Had enough?" Blackwood panted, wiping sweat from his forehead. Ashley turned around slow, her little face streaked with tears she hadn't even known she was crying. Her back on fire, but her spirit burning brighter than ever. "If you're done, sir," she said in a voice steady as stone, "I got cotton to pick." The silence that followed was deeper than the bottom of the ocean. Even the insects stopped buzzing. Even the wind held its breath. Blackwood stared at that child like he was seeing a ghost, like he couldn't believe what his own eyes was telling him. Then he did something that chilled every soul in that field. He laughed. "Well now," he said, dropping the bloody switch to the ground. "Well, well, well. Looks like we got ourselves a special one here. Looks like 15 ain't near enough to teach this lesson." He walked closer to Ashley, bent down so his pale face was level with hers, and when he spoke, his voice was soft as a lover's whisper but full of poison. "Next time," he said, "next time we ain't gonna use no switch. Next time, we gonna use something that leaves a more permanent lesson. Something that'll remind you every day for the rest of your life that you belong to me." Ashley looked right back at him, never blinking, never backing down. "Yes, sir," she said. "I understand." But Blackwood heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. Heard a note of challenge, a promise, a prophecy. Heard the voice of all the ancestors who died rather than bow. All the spirits who'd crossed the water in chains but kept their souls free. As he walked away, leaving Ashley standing there in the cotton field with her back bleeding and her spirit unbroken, Jonas Blackwood made himself a promise. He was gonna break that child if it was the last thing he did. Gonna crush whatever it was inside her that refused to bend. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just started a war he couldn't win. A war between the hammer and the anvil, between cruelty and courage, between a monster who thought he could own souls and a child who carried the fire of every ancestor who'd ever refused to be owned. The forge was waiting. The iron was ready. And Ashley had just received her first invitation to dance with the devil himself. The forge squatted beside the whipping post like some demon's altar, its iron mouth always hungry, always ready to swallow coal and breath fire. Jonas Blackwood had built it himself when he first took the overseer job at Wexford, designed it special for one purpose: mark in human flesh with permanent reminders of who owned what. Now you got to understand, child, branding slaves wasn't nothing new. Been happening since the first ship landed on these shores with African souls chained in its belly. Most overseers used simple letters, initials of the plantation, marks of ownership, symbols of bondage. But Blackwood, Lord have mercy, Blackwood had turned it into an art form of cruelty. He had irons shaped like letters, numbers, symbols. Had some that made intricate designs meant to hurt more than mark. Had others heated to different temperatures depending on how much pain he wanted to deliver. That forge was his workshop, his church, his shrine to the god of human suffering. The weeks after Ashley's first whipping passed like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Everybody on that plantation could feel something building, something dark and heavy pressing down on them like the air before a tornado. Ashley went about her work quiet as always, picking cotton with her mama, tending to chores, acting like nothing had happened. But them scars on her back told a different story. Told the story of 15 switches that couldn't break what was meant to stay whole. And Blackwood couldn't stop thinking about them eyes. Them deep dark eyes that looked right through him like he was made of glass. He started riding past Ashley more often during the day, stopping his horse to watch her work, waiting for her to stumble, to fail, to give him excuse for what was coming. But Ashley never stumbled. Picked her cotton clean and fast, kept her eyes down when he was looking, played the part of the obedient slave child. But Blackwood could smell rebellion on her like perfume. Could see it in the way she held her shoulders, the way she breathed, the way she existed in the world like she had a right to take up space, and it drove him mad as a rabid dog. One evening, when the sun was sinking low and the field hands was heading back to the quarters, Blackwood made his announcement. Called all the slaves to gather round the forge area. Made them stand in a circle like witnesses at a hanging. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying across the evening air like the call of death itself, "we gonna have ourselves a lesson. A lesson about proper behavior, about knowing your place, about understanding that some things in this world don't bend, they break." He looked straight at Ashley when he said it, and every soul there knew who that lesson was meant for. Ruth tried one more time to save her daughter. That night, in the darkness of their cabin, she fell to her knees beside Ashley's pallet and begged. "Baby girl," she whispered. "Tomorrow when he calls for you, you run. You run deep into them woods and you don't look back. I'd rather know you died free in the swamp than watch him destroy your spirit piece by piece." But Ashley just looked at her mama with them ancient eyes and shook her head slow. "Mama," she said, "if I run, he'll take it out on you. Take it out on everybody. And besides," she paused, touched her mama's face gentle as morning dew, "I ain't made for running, I'm made for standing." That night, the old folks say, the forge burned without nobody lighting it. Burned all night long like it was hungry for what was coming. Like the iron itself was preparing for its dance with human flesh. And in the quarters, folks lay awake listening to sounds they couldn't name. Sounds like chains rattling, like spirits walking, like the very earth moaning in anticipation of pain. Morning came gray and cold despite the summer heat. Like even the sun didn't want to shine on what was about to happen. Blackwood was up before dawn, tending his forge, arranging his irons like a surgeon laying out his tools. He'd chosen something special for Ashley. Not just a letter or a simple mark, but a design of his own creation. Something that would hurt going in and keep hurting every day after. When he called for Ashley, she came walking across that plantation yard like she was walking to her own wedding, calm and steady and sure. Ruth followed behind, weeping silent tears, and behind her came every slave on that plantation, forced to watch, forced to witness, forced to learn their own lesson about what happened to children who forgot their place. Blackwood had Ashley stand right next to the forge where she could feel the heat on her face, could smell the metal heating, could see the iron glowing red as hellfire in the coals. But she never flinched, never backed away, just stood there waiting for whatever he had planned. "You know why you're here," Blackwood said, pulling the first iron from the fire, watching it glow like a fallen star. "Yes, sir," Ashley said, her voice clear as creek water. "You aim to mark me. That's right. Gonna mark you so everybody knows what you are. Gonna mark you so you never forget who owns your black hide. You got anything to say before we begin?" Ashley looked around that circle of faces. Scared faces, sorrowful faces, angry faces that couldn't show their anger. Looked at her mama crying silent tears. Looked at Mama Senna nodding like she was given some kind of blessing. Looked at all them people who'd become her witnesses. Then she looked back at Blackwood, and when she spoke, her voice carried something that made every soul there shiver. Not with fear, but with recognition. Recognition of something powerful, something unbreakable, something that couldn't be owned no matter how many irons burned it. "I got nothing to say to you," Ashley said, "but I got something to say to my people." She turned to face the circle, turned her back on Blackwood like he wasn't even there, and spoke words that would be remembered long after the pain was forgotten. "Y'all watch close," she said. "Watch how a child of Africa takes fire. Watch how the ancestors live in my flesh. Watch how some things can't be broken no matter how hard they try." Then she turned back to Blackwood, held out her small arm, and waited for the iron to kiss her skin. The scream that followed wasn't hers, was his. Was the scream of a monster discovering that some prey fights back even when it's caught in the trap. The smell of burning flesh is something that gets into your soul and never leaves. Thick and sweet and wrong, like meat left too long in the fire, like life itself being consumed by evil. When that first iron pressed into Ashley's young skin, the smell rose up like incense to a demon god, and every person in that circle had to swallow down their own vomit. But the sound that came from Ashley's throat wasn't a scream, wasn't a cry, wasn't even a whimper, was something else entirely, a low humming sound, like she was singing a song only she could hear, like she was calling on spirits from across the water to give her strength. Blackwood pressed that iron deep, held it longer than he'd ever held one before, waiting for her to break, waiting for the sound he needed to hear. But Ashley kept humming, kept standing, kept looking at him with them eyes that burned hotter than any iron he could heat. When he finally pulled the iron away, the mark it left was perfect, a twisted design that looked like thorns wrapped around a cross, meant to remind her every day that she was crowned with suffering. But Ashley looked down at it like it was jewelry, like it was something beautiful instead of something meant to shame her. "That hurt?" Blackwood asked, breathing hard, sweat pouring down his face. "No, sir," Ashley lied, her voice steady as stone even though her whole arm was on fire. Felt like a mosquito bite. The rage that crossed Blackwood's face was terrible to see. He grabbed another iron from the fire, this one shaped like the letter S for slave, heated till it glowed white hot. "How about this one?" He pressed it into her shoulder, held it till the air filled with smoke and the smell of cooking meat. Ashley's humming got louder, turned into something that sounded almost like singing, and folks in that circle started to recognize the tune. An old spiritual their grandmamas used to sing, a song about crossing over to freedom. Still she didn't break. Still she stood. Still she looked at Blackwood like he was nothing more than a pest buzzing around her head. By the time he'd marked her 6 times, arm, shoulder, back, thigh, ankle, the soft skin behind her ear, Blackwood was raging like a madman. 6 perfect brands on a 7-year-old child's body. 6 marks of ownership. 6 scars meant to remind her every day that she belonged to him. But Ashley, sweet Lord Jesus, Ashley was still humming, still standing, still looking at him with them eyes full of fire that no iron could quench. "Had enough?" he panted, reaching for a 7th iron. Ashley looked around that circle of faces again, saw her mama's tears, saw Mama Senna's proud nod, saw all them folks who was learning that day what strength looked like when it wore the face of a child. Then she looked back at Blackwood and spoke words that chilled him to the bone. "I ain't even started yet," she said. That night, after the crowd had dispersed and Ashley had been carried back to the quarters by women who tended her wounds with tears and prayers and remedies passed down from Africa, something changed on Wexford Plantation. Something shifted in the very air, like the balance of power had tilted just enough to let light in where there'd only been darkness before. In the slave quarters, folks whispered about what they'd seen. Whispered about a child who took 6 branding irons and acted like she was receiving gifts instead of punishment. Whispered about the old songs she'd hummed, the way she'd turned torture into testimony, the way she'd faced down the devil himself and made him blink first. But in the overseer's house, Jonas Blackwood sat by his window staring out at them quarters, his hands shaking, his mind spinning like a broken wheel. He'd branded hundreds of slaves in his time, watched grown men beg and cry and break under the kiss of hot iron. But this child, this impossible child. He reached for the bottle of whiskey he kept on his desk, poured himself a glass with hands that trembled like leaves in a storm. As he drank, he made himself a promise, a dark promise that would echo through the years to come. Tomorrow he'd start again. Tomorrow he'd heat his irons hotter, press them deeper, hold them longer. He'd brand that child every day if he had to, mark every inch of her black skin, until he found the place where her spirit lived and burned it out completely. He didn't understand yet what he was dealing with, didn't understand that some souls are forged in fires hotter than any earthly flame, tempered by sufferings deeper than any human cruelty. Didn't understand that Ashley carried in her small body the accumulated strength of every ancestor who died in chains but kept their spirits free. In her cabin, Ashley lay on her side while her mama and the other women tended her wounds with grease and herbs and whispered prayers. The pain was terrible, fire spreading through every nerve, every muscle, every breath. But underneath the pain was something else, a deep, abiding certainty that this was just the beginning. "Mama," she whispered, "how many times you think he gonna brand me before he gives up?" Ruth's tears fell on her daughter's burned skin like holy water. "Baby girl," she said, "I don't think that man knows how to give up." Ashley nodded slow, winced as the movement pulled at her wounds. "Then I guess we gonna find out how much fire a body can hold before it turns to ash, or turns to iron." Outside, the forge still glowed in the darkness and the wind carried the sound of metal singing, a low, mournful tune that sounded like sorrow and promise mixed together. Tomorrow would bring more iron, more fire, more pain than any child should have to bear. But tonight, for just this moment, Ashley had won something, had proved to herself and her people that some things couldn't be broken, no matter how hard the world tried to break them, had shown that resistance could take many forms, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, sometimes wrapped in humming and song. The ancestors were watching, the spirits were gathering, and deep in the iron heart of that forge, something was waiting to be born from fire and pain, and the unbreakable will of a child who refused to bow. Years passed like blood through water on Wexford Plantation, and Ashley grew from branded child to scarred young woman under the watchful eye of that demon overseer. Every season brought new torments, new reasons for Blackwood to heat his irons, and add to the collection of marks that covered her body like a map of human cruelty. By the time Ashley reached her 15th year, she carried more than 60 brands on her flesh, some small as coins, some large as a man's hand, each one a testament to Blackwood's growing obsession with breaking what couldn't be broken. Her arms looked like twisted metal, her back like a quilt sewn with fire, her legs marked with symbols that had no earthly meaning except to cause pain. But the strangest thing, child, the thing that drove Blackwood near to madness, was that Ashley kept growing stronger, not just in body, though she was tall now and lean as a willow, with muscles hard from field work and eyes that could cut glass. She grew stronger in spirit too, like every brand was feeding something deep inside her instead of killing it. The other slaves on the plantation looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. Fear because being near Ashley meant drawing Blackwood's attention, meant maybe sharing in whatever punishment he was cooking up for her. But awe too, because she'd become something more than human in their eyes, a walking miracle, a living proof that some souls couldn't be owned no matter how many times they were marked. Ruth had died the winter Ashley turned 13, died quiet in her sleep like her heart just couldn't take watching her baby suffer no more. Ashley grieved for her mama, but she grieved silent, never giving Blackwood the satisfaction of seeing her tears, just kept working, kept standing, kept taking whatever he had to give. Old Mama Senna had taken to calling Ashley Iron Girl, saying the child had been kissed by fire so many times she was more metal than flesh now. "You watch," she'd whisper to the other women. "That girl gonna turn all that pain into power one day. Gonna use all that fire to burn down everything that tried to destroy her. The day that would change everything started like any other day in hell. Cotton picking season again. The fields white as snow but hot as the devil's breath, and Blackwood riding through on his pale horse looking for reasons to punish folks. He'd been drinking heavier lately, staying up nights staring out at the slave quarters like he was waiting for something. Like he was planning something that would finally give him what he'd been seeking all these years. Ashley was working in the far field with a group of newer slaves, folks recently bought at auction, who hadn't learned yet how to disappear when trouble came walking. Among them was a young man named Solomon, barely 20 years old, with kind eyes and gentle hands that reminded Ashley of her daddy, who'd been sold away before she was old enough to remember his face. Solomon had been on the plantation maybe 3 months, long enough to understand the rules, but not long enough to understand that some rules couldn't save you when evil had set its mind on destruction. He'd taken to walking Ashley to and from the fields, not courting exactly, but showing the kind of protective care that made other folks smile despite the circumstances. Blackwood had noticed, of course. Blackwood noticed everything when it came to Ashley. Noticed how Solomon would share his meager rations with her, how he'd position himself between her and danger when he could, how he looked at her not as damaged goods but as something precious that deserved protecting. On this particular day when the sun was beating down merciless and the cotton bolls were bursting with heat, Solomon made the mistake of touching Ashley's hand. Just a brief touch, gentle as butterfly wings, when he passed her his water gourd. But Blackwood saw it from across the field, saw that moment of human tenderness, and something in his twisted mind snapped like a dry twig. He spurred his horse into a gallop, riding down on them like the pale horseman of death, dust clouding up behind him like the smoke of hell. When he reached them, he jumped down from his saddle with a fury that made the very air tremble. "What did I just see?" he roared, his voice carrying across the cotton field like thunder. Solomon stepped back, dropped the water gourd, raised his hands in surrender. "Nothing, master. Just giving the girl some water, that's all." "Water?" Blackwood's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "That what we callin' it now? Water?" Ashley stepped forward, tried to put herself between Solomon and the overseer's rage. "It's the truth, sir. He was just being kind." Blackwood's pale eyes fixed on her with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful in its terrible completeness. "Kind," he repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Negro buck being kind to my prize nigger girl. Well, ain't that sweet?" He walked to his horse, reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a coil of rope and a branding iron he'd been carrying special, one shaped like the letter H for harlot, meant for women who forgot their place. The iron wasn't hot yet, but Ashley knew that wouldn't matter for long. "Strip," Blackwood commanded. Ashley looked around the cotton field, saw all them faces watching, saw Solomon's eyes wide with horror and helplessness, saw the other workers frozen like statues. Then she looked back at Blackwood and shook her head slow. "No, sir," she said quiet. "I ain't done nothing to deserve stripping in front of all these folks." The silence that followed was deeper than the ocean, heavier than lead. Even the insects stopped buzzing. Even the wind held its breath. Blackwood's smile was terrible to see. "You think you got a choice?" he asked soft. "You think after all these years, after all these lessons, you still got the right to tell me no?" He gestured to two of his drivers, men who'd learned to follow orders without question if they wanted to keep breathing. "Strip her," he commanded, "then tie her to the whipping post. It's time this plantation learned what happens to uppity nigger girls who think they can play at being human." That's when Solomon did something that surprised everybody, including himself. Surprised them because he was a gentleman, not a fighter, the kind who'd rather turn the other cheek than raise his hand in anger. But something about seeing Ashley about to be stripped and shamed in front of all them people, something about the look on Blackwood's face made him step forward. "Leave her be," Solomon said, his voice shaken but firm. "Whatever you think you saw, it was my fault, not hers. Punish me if you got to punish somebody." Blackwood turned to look at Solomon like he was seeing a ghost, like he couldn't believe a slave had just spoken up in defiance of direct orders. "What did you say, boy?" "I said leave her be. She ain't done nothing wrong. You want to beat somebody, you beat me." The overseer's laugh echoed across the cotton field like the sound of chains rattling in hell. "Well, well, well," he said. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero. A big, strong buck willing to protect his woman. Ain't that romantic?" He walked closer to Solomon, close enough that the young man could smell the whiskey on his breath, could see the madness dancing in his pale eyes. "You know what I think, boy? I think you both need to learn a lesson. I think this whole plantation needs to learn what happens when niggers start forgetting their place." Blackwood turned back to his drivers. "Change of plans," he said. "We gonna make this real special. Gonna mark them both. 100 brands each. Right here, right now, in front of God and everybody. Let every soul on this plantation see what love costs when you're black and in bondage." A gasp went up from the watching crowd like the sound of souls dying. 100 brands was a death sentence. Wasn't no body on earth could survive that much fire, that much pain. Wasn't nothing but torture designed to kill slow and cruel. But Ashley, Lord have mercy. Ashley stepped forward again, put herself right in front of Blackwood, looked him straight in the eye with a calmness that was terrible and beautiful both. "I'll take the 200, she said. "All of them. Let the boy go, and I'll take every brand you want to give." The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Blackwood stared at her like he was seeing a vision, like he couldn't believe what his ears was telling him. "What did you say?" 200 brands, Ashley repeated, her voice clear as creek water. "You want to mark somebody, you mark me, but you leave Solomon alone." Blackwood's eyes lit up with a joy so terrible it made grown men look away, because he'd been waiting for this moment, dreaming of this moment, planning for this moment since that first day when he saw fire burning in a 7-year-old child's eyes. 200, he whispered, like he was tasting the number. 200 brands on one nigger girl. That would be something to see, wouldn't it? He looked around at all them faces, saw the horror, saw the fear, saw the helpless rage that couldn't show itself. Then he looked back at Ashley and nodded slow. "You got yourself a deal, gal, 200 brands, but not here, not now. This deserves a proper ceremony. Tomorrow night when the sun goes down and the fire burns bright, tomorrow night the whole county gonna come watch Ashley take her medicine." As he climbed back on his horse and rode away, laughing like a demon escaped from hell, Ashley stood in that cotton field surrounded by folks who loved her and couldn't save her. knowing she'd just signed her own death warrant to save a boy who'd showed her kindness. But something else was growing in her heart besides fear. Something hot and bright and terrible. Something that whispered in the voice of her ancestors, "Your time is coming, daughter. Your time to stop taking and start giving back." Word spread through the county like wildfire through dry grass. By sunset, every white family within 50 miles knew that Jonas Blackwood was going to give a demonstration the likes of which hadn't been seen since the old days, when public punishments was entertainment for folks who called themselves civilized. They started arriving at Wexford Plantation before dawn. Men in their finest suits, women in their Sunday dresses, children dressed up like they was going to church instead of coming to watch a human being tortured to death. They brought picnic baskets and bottles of whiskey, chairs and parasols, cameras to capture the moment for posterity. Ashley spent that last day in the fields, working like always, acting like nothing had changed even though everybody knew she was walking dead. The other slaves moved around her like she was made of glass, afraid to speak, afraid to touch, afraid to do anything that might make this last day harder than it already was. Solomon tried to talk to her, tried to convince her to run, to hide, to let him take his share of the punishment like he'd offered. But Ashley just smiled at him soft and shook her head. "This been coming for a long time," she told him quiet. "Been building up like a storm, and now it's time for the thunder. You just make sure you remember what you see tonight. Make sure you tell folks someday that Ashley went down swinging." As evening approached and the white folks gathered around the whipping area like vultures circling carrion, Blackwood supervised the preparation with the care of a man planning a wedding. He'd brought in extra forges, extra coal, extra irons, had them arranged in a semicircle so he could keep multiple brands heating while he worked, so there wouldn't be no delays, no time for Ashley to recover between marks. He'd also brought in a doctor from town, not to help, but to make sure Ashley stayed conscious through the whole ordeal. Couldn't have her passing out and missing the education he was fixing to provide. The plantation slaves was forced to watch, made to stand in a circle around the punishment area so they could learn their lesson too. Ruth was gone, but Mama Senna was there, ancient and bent but still breathing, still carrying the wisdom of the ancestors in her bones. When Ashley was brought out, stripped to the waist and chained to the whipping post, Mama Senna started singing low, a song in the old language, a song of crossing over, a song of going home. Other voices joined hers, voices that shouldn't have been singing at a time like this but couldn't help themselves. Soon the whole circle of slaves was humming along, creating a sound like distant thunder, like waves crashing on a far shore, like the voices of the dead calling the living home. Blackwood raised his hand for silence, but the humming continued. Raised his voice, threatened punishment, but still the sound rolled on like water over stone. Finally, he gave up, decided to let them sing if it made them feel better. Wouldn't matter soon anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the white crowd, his voice carrying clear in the evening air. "Tonight you gonna witness something special. Tonight you gonna see what happens when a nigger forgets her place and thinks she can challenge white authority. Tonight, Ashley here gonna receive 200 brands, and by the time we're done, there ain't gonna be enough of her left to challenge anybody ever again." A cheer went up from the crowd, hands clapping like they was at a revival meeting instead of a torture session. Children pointed and laughed. Women fanned themselves in anticipation. Men passed bottles of whiskey and made bets on how long Ashley would last before she died. But when Blackwood turned to face Ashley with that first iron glowing white hot in his hand, something in her eyes stopped him cold. Wasn't fear he saw there, wasn't resignation, wasn't even the stubborn defiance he'd come to expect. Was something else entirely, something that looked almost like pity. "You ready, gal?" he asked, hefting the iron. Ashley looked at him for a long moment, then spoke words that chilled every soul who heard them, white and black alike. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. "Question is, are you?" The first iron hit her shoulder blade with a hiss like the devil's own serpent. Ashley's body jerked with the shock of it, but no sound came from her throat except that low humming that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than her chest, somewhere older than her years. The second iron followed quick, then the third, then the fourth. Blackwood worked with the precision of a craftsman, placing each brand careful, making sure they didn't overlap, making sure he had space for all 200 marks he'd promised. By the 20th brand, the smell of cooking flesh hung over the plantation like incense at a black mass. By the 40th, the white folks had stopped cheering and started whispering among themselves, disturbed by something they couldn't name. By the 60th, even Blackwood was starting to sweat, his face pale as his victim's usually was by this point. But Ashley kept humming, kept standing, kept looking at him with them eyes that seemed to see right through to his rotten soul. "Had enough yet?" he panted, reaching for another iron. "Just getting started," Ashley whispered back, and Blackwood heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. Heard a note of anticipation, like she was waiting for something, like she was building towards something he couldn't see. The 80th brand went across her chest, right over her heart. The 90th marked her back in a pattern that looked like wings. The 100th was placed on her forehead, meant to mark her as property forever. But still Ashley stood. Still she hummed. Still she looked at Blackwood with eyes that burned brighter than any iron he could heat. The white crowd had gone silent now, disturbed by what they was seeing, disturbed by the way this young woman was taking punishment that should have killed her 50 brands ago. Some of the women had covered their children's eyes. Some of the men had stopped drinking, stopped betting, stopped enjoying what they'd come to enjoy. Only the slaves kept singing, their voices rising higher now, turning from humming to actual song. Spirituals that told of crossing over, of going home, of freedom coming on wings of fire. By the 150th brand, Blackwood's hands was shaking so bad he could barely hold the iron steady. Sweat poured down his face like rain, and his breath came short and sharp like he was the one being tortured instead of Ashley. "Why won't you break?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why won't you just break?" Ashley turned her head to look at him, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the plantation like the voice of prophecy itself. "Because," she said, "some things was made to burn but never be consumed. Some things was forged in fires hotter than any you can make. Some things was born to turn pain into power." She paused, smiled at him with an expression so peaceful it was terrifying. "And some things," she continued, "was sent here just to teach men like you that evil ain't the strongest force in this world." The 160th brand went across her neck. The 170th marked her arms in spirals that looked like chains. The 180th created patterns on her legs that resembled lightning. But with each new mark, instead of getting weaker, Ashley seemed to glow brighter. The slaves' singing reached a crescendo that sounded like the voices of every ancestor who'd ever died in bondage, every spirit who'd crossed the water in chains, every soul who'd refused to be broken no matter what the world threw at them. And then, just as Blackwood reached for the 190th iron, something happened that nobody there would ever forget. Something that would be whispered about in slave quarters and plantation parlors for generations to come. The iron in Blackwood's hand began to melt. Not from the heat of the forge, from something else entirely. Something that came from Ashley herself, from the fire burning in her eyes, from the power of all them ancestors singing through her voice. One by one, all the irons in all the forges began to glow brighter, then softer, then started dripping like candle wax onto the ground. The heat that came off them wasn't the heat of coal and flame, but something else. Something that felt like justice itself burning white hot and ready to be served. Blackwood dropped the melting iron, stepped back, stared at Ashley like he was seeing the devil himself instead of a young woman covered in brands. What are you?" Ashley smiled, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, spoke in a voice that carried the power of storm and earthquake both. "I'm the one you should have left alone," she said. "I'm the fire you tried to put out that's been waiting all these years to burn you back." The melted iron pooled on the ground like silver tears, still glowing with heat that had nothing to do with coal or flame. Ashley stood chained to that whipping post, her body covered in 189 brands, but something about her had changed. Something that made even the bravest white man in that crowd take a step backward. Something that made children hide behind their mama's skirts. The air itself felt different now, thick and electric, like the moments before a tornado touches down. The temperature had dropped despite all them forges burning, and a wind had picked up from nowhere, carrying the smell of metal and rain and something else. Something that smelled like justice long delayed finally coming home. Blackwood stood frozen, staring at the puddle of melted iron at his feet, his mind trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. Around him, the white folks who'd come for entertainment was murmuring among themselves, some crossing themselves like Catholics, others backing toward their carriages with fear written plain on their faces. But the slaves, Lord have mercy, the slaves had stopped singing and started something else entirely. Started a low chanting that seemed to come from the earth itself, words and languages that predated the plantation, the county, maybe even the continent, words that called on powers older than civilization, older than slavery, older than the memory of free men. Ashley tested the chains that held her to the whipping post, and them heavy iron links began to glow, not with heat, but with something else, something that made them stretch and soften like taffy in summer sun. One by one the links parted, falling to the ground with sounds like broken bells. "This ain't possible," Blackwood whispered, his voice shaken like a leaf in winter wind. This ain't natural." Ashley turned to face him, and when she moved, every brand on her body glowed like fallen stars, like constellations mapped in pain across the night sky of her skin. The light they gave off wasn't harsh, was gentle almost, like moonlight on water. But it was strong enough to illuminate every face in that crowd, strong enough to show fear and wonder and guilt all mixed together. "Natural?" Ashley laughed, and her voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats, like the ancestors themselves was speaking through her. "Wasn't nothing natural about putting 200 brands on a child's body. Wasn't nothing natural about chain, whip, and iron. But you're about to learn what natural really means." She began walking toward Blackwood, slow and steady, her bare feet making no sound on the hard-packed earth. With each step, the brands on her body pulsed brighter, and the ground beneath her feet began to smoke. Not burning exactly, but changing, like the very soil was transforming under the touch of her scarred soles. "Stay back," Blackwood warned, reaching for the pistol on his hip. "Stay back or I'll shoot." "Shoot then," Ashley said, never breaking stride. "See if lead can stop what you started with iron." Blackwood drew his gun, pointed it straight at Ashley's heart, pulled the trigger. The shot rang out across the plantation like thunder, echoing off the buildings, sending birds exploding from the trees in clouds of panic. But Ashley kept walking. The bullet had struck her, they all saw it hit, saw her body jerk with the impact. But when she looked down at her chest where the lead should have torn through flesh and bone, there was nothing there but another mark. This one shaped like a star, glowing gentle and warm like it had always been there. "Iron taught me to take fire," Ashley said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Fire taught me to take pain. Pain taught me to take anything this world could throw at me. What did you think a little piece of lead was going to teach me?" Blackwood fired again, then again, emptying his cylinder into Ashley's body. Each bullet struck home. Each one should have dropped her where she stood, but each one just became another glowing mark on her skin, another star in the constellation of her suffering, another testament to power that wouldn't be denied. "Please," Blackwood whispered, dropping the empty gun, falling to his knees in the dirt. "Please, I don't understand what's happening." Ashley stood over him now, and when she looked down, her eyes held all the sorrow and rage of every soul who'd ever died in chains, every mother who'd watched her children sold away, every man who'd been worked to death in fields that would never know his name. "What's happening?" she said, her voice soft as silk but sharp as broken glass. "Is that the bills come due? What's happening is that every mark you put on my body is about to find its way back to yours. What's happening is justice, Overseer. Justice served red hot and permanent." She reached down, picked up one of the puddles of melted iron that had been a branding tool just minutes before. In her hands, the metal began to reshape itself, flowing like water, forming itself into something new, something with a sharp edge and a longer handle, something that looked like it was meant for digging, or for burying. "You gave me 189 brands," Ashley said, testing the weight of her new tool. "But I think one ought to be enough for you, one real deep one that goes all the way to the bone and beyond." The white folks in the crowd was running now, climbing into carriages and wagons, whipping their horses into gallops as they fled from what they couldn't understand, from justice that came wearing a face they'd never expected to see. Behind them, the plantation house itself began to glow. its white walls taken on the same gentle radiance that emanated from Ashley's brands. The slaves had formed a circle around Ashley and Blackwood now, still chanting, still calling on powers that had been waiting generations for this moment. Old Mama Senna stepped forward, her ancient face streaked with tears of joy and vindication. "Daughter," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "the ancestors are proud. The spirits of the Middle Passage are singing. The souls of the whipping post are finally at rest." Ashley nodded, never taking her eyes off Blackwood, who knelt in the dirt like a man praying to a god he'd never believed in. "Tell them," she said to Mama Senna, "tell them their suffering wasn't in vain. Tell them their children learned to turn wounds into weapons, brands into blessings, chains into choices." She raised the tool she'd forged from melted iron, held it high so it caught the light from all her glowing scars. "Tell them," she continued, "that Ashley of the red-hot iron is fixin' to plant something in this cursed ground that ain't never gonna grow nothing but justice again." Blackwood looked up at her with eyes wide as a child's, finally understanding what he'd created in his years of casual cruelty, finally seeing what happens when you torture an angel and wonder why heaven comes looking for you. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Ashley smiled down at him, and for just a moment, her face was gentle as morning dew, kind as her mama's touch when fever broke. "I know you are," she said soft. "I know you are now. But sorry don't heal brands, Overseer. Sorry don't bring back the dead. Sorry don't undo a lifetime of evil." She raised the iron tool higher, and every scar on her body blazed like the surface of the sun. "But justice," she said. "Justice makes sure it don't happen again." The last thing Jonas Blackwood saw before the iron found its home was Ashley's face, peaceful as prayer, beautiful as freedom, terrible as the wrath of every ancestor who'd ever died dreaming of this day. The last thing he heard was the sound of singing. Hundreds of voices joined together in a song of crossing over, of going home, of justice finally served hot and heavy as it was meant to be. When morning came, they found him buried deep in the earth where the whipping post used to stand, marked with a brand that went clean through to his soul. And standing over the grave was Ashley, no longer glowing, no longer burning, just a young woman scarred by life but not broken by it, holding a shovel made from melted iron and watching the sun rise over land that would never again echo with the sound of unjust suffering. The age of Jonas Blackwood was over. The time of Ashley had begun, and for the first time in generations, Wexford Plantation was truly free. When dawn broke over Wexford Plantation that morning after justice was served, it wasn't the same sun that had risen over fields of bondage for so many years. This sun seemed brighter somehow, cleaner, like it was finally free to shine on ground that had been washed clean with righteous blood. Ashley stood where the whipping post used to be, her scarred body silhouetted against the morning light, holding that shovel made from melted iron like it was a scepter of liberation. Around her, the other slaves moved quiet as spirits, not sure yet if what they'd witnessed was real or dream, not sure if they was still in bondage or if freedom had come walking through fire and pain to set them all loose. Old Mama Senna was the first to approach, her ancient feet shuffling slow across ground that still held the echo of Blackwood's final screams. She looked up at Ashley with eyes that had seen too much sorrow and finally witnessed enough joy to balance the scales. "Child," she whispered, her voice crackling like autumn leaves. "What happens now? What do we do with freedom when we ain't never learned how to hold it?" Ashley looked around at all them faces, faces that had been bent by fear so long they'd forgotten how to lift up straight, eyes that had been cast down so many years, they'd near forgot how to meet another's gaze direct. She saw Solomon standing at the edge of the group, tears streaming down his cheeks, and she saw children peeking out from behind their mama's skirts, wondering if the nightmare was really over. "Now," Ashley said, her voice carrying across the plantation like morning wind through wheat, "now we learn what our ancestors always knew, but couldn't teach us while we was in chains. We learn that freedom ain't something somebody gives you. It's something you take, something you claim, something you make real with your own two hands." She lifted the iron shovel, and in the morning light, they could see it wasn't just a tool anymore, was something else entirely. The metal had transformed overnight, shaped itself into patterns that looked like growing things, like roots and branches, like life itself twisted into iron form. "But first," Ashley continued, "we got to plant something in this ground, got to make sure what happened here don't never happen again. Not to nobody, not nowhere." She began to dig then, driving that transformed shovel deep into the earth where Jonas Blackwood lay buried. But she wasn't digging him up, was digging deeper past his corpse, past the layer of soil that had drunk so much blood over the years, down to clean earth that hadn't been touched by human cruelty. With each shovelful, Ashley spoke words that seemed to come from someplace older than memory, words in languages that had crossed the ocean in slave ships and survived in the secret places of the heart, words of blessing and binding, words that would make the very ground itself remember justice, make the earth itself stand guard against future evil. The other slaves began to gather closer, drawn by something they couldn't name but could feel in their bones. Solomon stepped forward first, held out his hands. "Let me help," he said, simple. Ashley handed him the shovel, and when he touched it, they all saw the metal respond to his grip, watched patterns of light flow through the iron like veins of gold. He dug for a while, then passed it to another, then another, until every person on that plantation had put their hands to the tool, had felt their own pain and hope flow into the metal. By the time the hole was deep enough, the shovel had become something beautiful beyond description, a work of art that told the story of their suffering and their strength all twisted together in iron form. Ashley took it back, held it high so everyone could see. "This here's our freedom staff," she announced. "Made from the same iron that tried to break us, forged in the fire of our own endurance, blessed by every hand that ever knew bondage and chose to survive." She planted the staff deep in the hole they'd dug, and as soon as it touched the earth, things began to change. The ground around it started to glow with soft light, and where the light touched, green things began to grow. Not cotton, not tobacco, not any crop meant to profit from human misery, but wildflowers and healing herbs, plants that grew for their own beauty and purpose. "From this day forward," Ashley declared, her voice carrying the authority of prophecy, "this ground is consecrated. Ain't no man gonna own another man here. Ain't no whip gonna crack, no iron gonna burn, no child gonna be born into chains on this soil." The light spread outward from the freedom staff, touching every building on the plantation, every field, every corner where suffering had taken root. Where it passed, things changed. The slave quarters became homes instead of prisons. The big house lost its air of oppression and became just another building made of wood and stone. The fields transformed from sites of bondage into places where food could grow to feed free people. But Ashley wasn't done. She turned to face the crowd of former slaves, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of destiny itself. "Freedom ain't just about not being owned," she said. "Freedom is about choosing your own path, about building something with your own hands, about leaving something better for the children who come after." She gestured toward the horizon, where the morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold and promise. "Some of y'all gonna want to stay here, make this place into something good, show the world that ground that knew slavery can know freedom too. Some of y'all gonna want to leave, find family that was sold away, build new lives in places where nobody knows your scars." She paused, looked each person in the eye, let them see that the choice was truly theirs to make. "And some of y'all," she continued, "some of y'all gonna want to carry this message to other places where folks is still in chains, where overseers still think they can break what wasn't meant to be broken." Solomon stepped forward again, his face shining with purpose. "What about you, Ashley? What path you gonna choose?" Ashley smiled, and for the first time since she was 7 years old and felt the first iron burn her flesh, the smile reached all the way to her eyes. "Me," she said, "I got work to do. Got a message to carry to every plantation, every slave quarter, every place where folks is still bending under the weight of other people's evil." She began walking toward the road that led away from Wexford, and with each step her scars seemed to glow brighter, like she was carrying the light of freedom itself in her skin. "I'm gonna tell them about the iron that couldn't break me, about the fire that made me stronger, about the brands that became blessings." The crowd followed her to the edge of the plantation, some crying, some singing, all of them knowing they was witnessing the birth of something that would live long after they was all dust and memory. At the property line, Ashley turned back one last time. "Remember this day," she told them. "Remember what you seen, what you felt. what you learned about the power that lives inside every human soul. And when somebody tells you that you can't, that you ain't worthy, that you was born to bow and scrape and suffer, she held up her arms, let the morning light play across the constellation of scars that covered her flesh. You show them these marks, and you tell them, "These is the brands of Ashley of the red-hot iron, and they taught me that some things can't be broken, some fires make you stronger, and some pain becomes the pathway to power itself." With that, she turned and walked away, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back, and the message burned into her very being. Behind her, the Freedom Staff glowed like a beacon, sending its light out across the countryside, calling to every soul still in bondage, promising them that their time of liberation was coming. And in the distance, carried on the wind like the voices of angels, came the sound of singing. Not the mournful spirituals of the quarters, but something new, something joyful, something that spoke of hope fulfilled and promises kept. Word of what happened at Wexford Plantation spread like gospel fire through the slave quarters of 3 states. Spread in whispers passed from field hand to house servant, in songs sung low while cotton was picked, in prayers offered up when masters wasn't listening. Spread until every black soul in the deep South had heard tell of Ashley of the red-hot iron, the woman who took 200 brands and turned suffering into salvation. Some folks said it was just a story, a tale told to give hope to the hopeless. Others swore it was true, said they'd seen the scars with their own eyes, felt the power that radiated from her skin like heat from a forge. But true or not, the story did what stories do. It planted seeds in hearts that had been too long barren, watered ground that had been too long dry. Ashley walked the roads of Georgia and South Carolina like a prophet of liberation, carrying her message from plantation to plantation, from slave quarter to hidden gathering, from hush harbor to praise house. Everywhere she went, the brands on her body told their tale without words, spoke of endurance beyond human limits, of strength that couldn't be broken, of fire that purified instead of destroyed. At Magnolia Grove Plantation in Georgia, she stood before 200 slaves at midnight in the deep woods, her scars glowing soft in the moonlight, and told them about the choice that lived inside every human heart. "Y'all think you ain't got no choices," she said, her voice carrying clear through the trees. "Think you got to take whatever master dishes out, bow your head and bear whatever burden they load on your back. But I'm here to tell you different." She rolled up her sleeves, let them see the constellation of brands that covered her arms like a map of pain transformed into power. Every one of these marks was meant to break me. Every burn was supposed to teach me that I was nothing, that I deserved whatever cruelty the world wanted to pour out on me. An old man in the crowd called out, his voice shaken with years of accumulated sorrow. "But how do you bear it, daughter? How do you take that kind of pain and not let it kill everything good inside you?" Ashley's smile was gentle as morning dew, warm as a mother's touch. "You bear it by remembering that pain ain't the end of the story, it's just the middle. You bear it by knowing that every scar is proof you survived something that was meant to destroy you. You bear it by turning wounds into wisdom, brands into blessings." At Riverdale Plantation in South Carolina, she met with a group of women whose children had been sold away, whose hearts had been broken so many times they'd near forgot how to heal. She sat with them in the dim light of a cabin, and when they saw the marks on her body, they wept, not for her pain but for recognition of their own. "Sister," one woman whispered, reaching out to trace a scar that ran across Ashley's shoulder, "how do you carry all that hurt and still find reason to hope?" "Because," Ashley replied, covering the woman's hand with her own, "hope ain't something you find, it's something you make. Every day you wake up and choose to keep breathing. Every moment you decide to love instead of hate. Every time you look at your scars and see strength instead of shame. That's hope. That's the choice that no master, no overseer, no whip or chain or brand can take away from you." But it was at Shadowmere Plantation in Mississippi that Ashley's message found its deepest root, took hold in soil that had been prepared by generations of suffering. The overseer there was a man named Caleb Morrison, every bit as cruel as Jonas Blackwood had been, maybe worse. He'd heard rumors about what happened at Wexford, heard whispers about a scarred woman who was spreading dangerous ideas among the slaves. When Ashley arrived at Shadowmere in the dead of night, Morrison was waiting for her. Had his dogs, his guns, his drivers, all ready to put an end to whatever foolishness this uppity nigger woman thought she could bring to his plantation. "So you're the one they call Ashley of the red-hot iron," Morrison said, stepping out of the shadows with his rifle pointed at her heart. "Come to spread your poison on my property, have you?" Ashley looked at him calm as still water, unafraid of the gun, unimpressed by his bluster. Around them, hidden in the darkness, she could feel the presence of Shadowmere's slaves, 300 souls who'd been beaten down so long they'd almost forgot they was souls at all. "I come to bring a message," Ashley said, simple. "Message about freedom, about choice, about the power that lives inside every human heart." Morrison laughed, but it wasn't a sound of humor. It was the bark of a mad dog, the cackle of a creature that had forgotten how to feel anything but cruelty. "Power," he sneered. "What power does a slave have? What choice? You belong to whoever owns your papers, and right now that's nobody, which makes you fair game for anybody who wants to take you." He gestured to his men, and they moved to surround Ashley, their faces hard as stone, their hands ready for violence. But Ashley just stood there, peaceful as prayer, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the plantation like the sound of freedom itself. "You're right," she said. "I don't belong to nobody, but not because I'm fair game, because I learned how to own myself. Learned that the only chains that really hold you are the ones you accept in your mind. The only brands that really mark you are the ones you let define who you are." She began to glow then, soft at first, then brighter, until every scar on her body blazed like a star in the Mississippi night. Morrison stepped back, his rifle forgotten, his men frozen with shock and fear. "This is what I learned in the fire," Ashley continued, her voice growing stronger. "This is what 200 brands taught me, that some souls can't be owned, some spirits can't be broken, some lights can't be put out no matter how much darkness you try to smother them with." She raised her arms, and the light from her scars reached out like fingers of dawn, touching the hidden slaves, waking them from the sleep of despair they'd been lost in for so long. One by one, they stepped out of their hiding places, drawn by something they couldn't resist, called by a voice they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear. "Come," Ashley called to them. "Come and see what you really are. Come and remember what you forgot. Come and claim the power that was always yours to claim." Morrison tried to raise his rifle again, but his hands was shaken too bad to aim. "Stay back," he screamed at the approaching slaves. "Stay back or I'll shoot every last one of you." But the slaves kept coming, and as they got closer to Ashley's light, something amazing happened. Their backs began to straighten, their eyes began to shine, their voices began to rise in songs they'd forgotten they knew, songs of freedom and power, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. Morrison fired his rifle into the air, but the sound was swallowed up by the singing, overwhelmed by the power of 300 voices joined together in harmony. His dogs whimpered and ran. His drivers threw down their weapons and backed away. And Ashley stood in the middle of it all, her scars blazing like the surface of the sun, her arms outstretched like she was embracing the whole world, her voice rising above the chorus like the call of freedom itself. "Remember," she sang, "remember who you are. Remember what you were before they told you what you had to be. Remember the fire inside you, the light that no darkness can put out, the power that no master can own." By dawn, Shadowmere Plantation was empty. Every slave had walked away, following Ashley's light toward freedom, leaving Morrison alone with his dogs and his guns and his useless rage. They walked all the way to the Ohio River, where conductors on the Underground Railroad was waiting to carry them the rest of the way to Canada. But Ashley didn't cross that river. Her work wasn't done yet. There was still too many plantations, too many slaves, too many folks who needed to hear the message she carried in her scarred flesh. She turned south again, back toward the heart of darkness, back toward the places where suffering still ruled, and freedom was still just a whisper in the night. Behind her, the former slaves of Shadowmere sang her name as they crossed into liberty, their voices carrying across the water like a promise of liberation for all who still waited in bondage. The stories of Ashley's journeys reached the ears of powerful men in powerful places, men who owned vast plantations and countless human souls, men who understood that what she represented was more dangerous than any army, any weapon, any force they'd ever faced. Because she represented something they couldn't fight with violence. She represented the simple truth that some things couldn't be owned, no matter how many papers you had saying they was yours. A gathering was called in Charleston, in the grand ballroom of the St. Cecilia Society, where the wealthiest planters from 3 states came together to discuss what they called the Ashley problem. Men who'd never agreed on anything found common cause in their fear of a scarred woman, whose very existence challenged everything they'd built their world on. "She's spreading like a disease," declared Hamilton Westbrook, owner of 5 plantations and 800 slaves. "Every place she goes, we lose property. Good, valuable property just walking away like they got some kind of right to choose their own fate. It's not just the property loss," added Cornelius Fairfax, his face red with whiskey and rage. "It's what she represents. If the niggers start believing they can't be broken, if they start thinking they got some kind of power we can't touch, the whole system falls apart." They talked through the night about bounties and slave catchers, about dogs and guns and ways to end Ashley's message permanently. But one man, elderly Judge Silas Blackwood, brother to the late Jonas Blackwood, stood up with a different kind of solution. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years and authority, "we're thinking about this all wrong. You can't kill an idea with a bullet. You can't chain a message, but you can contaminate it." He walked to the center of the room, his walking stick clicking on the marble floor like a countdown to something terrible. "My brother thought he could break her with iron and fire. Fool that he was, he only made her stronger. But there are other ways to destroy a spirit. Deeper ways, more permanent ways." The room fell silent as the old judge outlined his plan. Not violence, but seduction. Not physical torture, but spiritual corruption. Not brands that would heal into scars of strength, but temptations that would rot the soul from the inside. "We offer her what every slave dreams of," Judge Blackwood explained. "Not just freedom, luxury, not just escape from bondage, elevation to privilege. We make her one of us. We corrupt her message by corrupting the messenger." Within a month, the trap was set. Elaborate rumors began circulating through slave quarters about Ashley being offered a reward for her work. A fine house in Boston, money enough to live like a queen, servants of her own, everything her heart could desire. All she had to do was stop her wandering, stop her preaching, accept the gratitude of certain unnamed benefactors who admired her entrepreneurial spirit. The bait was delivered by Sarah Morrison, the estranged wife of the Shadowmere overseer, who'd left her husband after witnessing what Ashley had done to his plantation. Sarah found Ashley camped by a creek in the Georgia woods, tending a fire and singing low songs to herself. "Miss Ashley," Sarah said, approaching with hands raised to show she carried no weapons, "I bring word from Charleston. There are folks there, important folks, who want to make you an offer." Ashley looked up from her fire, her scarred face beautiful in the flickering light. "What kind of offer?" "Freedom," Sarah said. "Real freedom. Not just the running kind, but the living kind. A house, money, respect. All you got to do is retire from your current activities. Settle down somewhere nice and peaceful, and let other folks handle the business of liberation." For a long moment, Ashley stared into the flames, and Sarah couldn't tell what she was thinking. The fire reflected off her scars, making them glow like a constellation of pain and power all twisted together. "Tell me," Ashley said finally, "what do you think would happen to all them folks still in chains if I took this offer? What do you think would happen to the message I carry if I traded it for a comfortable retirement?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I suppose other leaders would rise up. Other voices would speak the truth." Ashley smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Would they? Or would folks look at my fine house and my easy life and decide that maybe slavery ain't so bad after all? Maybe the brands and the whips and the chains ain't worth fighting? If the fighter herself gave up fighting for the chance to live comfortable?" She stood up, and in the firelight, every scar on her body seemed to pulse with life. "You go back to Charleston," she said. "You tell them powerful men that Ashley of the Red Hot Iron ain't for sale. Tell them these brands can't be bought. This message can't be silenced. This fire can't be put out with promises of comfort." She walked closer to Sarah, and the woman could feel heat radiating from Ashley's skin like warmth from a forge. And you tell them something else, Ashley continued. Tell them that every slave they own, every soul they think belongs to them, carries the same fire I carry. Tell them that iron only makes it stronger, pain only makes it purer, and time only makes it spread. Sarah backed away, frightened by something she couldn't name, something that burned in Ashley's eyes like the promise of Judgment Day. What? What should I tell them you plan to do? Ashley's smile was terrible and beautiful both, like lightning illuminating a storm. Tell them I plan to visit every plantation, every slave quarter, every place where human souls are bought and sold. Tell them I plan to show every chained man, every branded woman, every child born into bondage that they carry power enough to melt iron, break chains, and transform suffering into strength. She gestured toward the fire, and the flames leaped higher, casting dancing shadows on the trees around them. Tell them that the age of owning people is ending, whether they're ready for it or not. Tell them that freedom ain't coming on wings of angels or armies of liberation. It's coming in the hearts of folks who learned that some things can't be owned, some spirits can't be broken, some fires burn too bright to ever be put out. As Sarah rode away into the darkness, carrying the message back to Charleston, Ashley stood by her fire and sang the old songs her mama taught her, sang the freedom songs she'd learned in the quarters, sang new songs that spoke of liberation coming like dawn after the longest night in history. Behind her, carved into the bark of an old oak tree, glowed words that seemed to write themselves in letters of fire. Ashley was here. Ashley is coming. Ashley will always be. And across the South, in slave quarters where folks gathered to whisper about hope and freedom, children learned a new song, a song about a woman who took iron and fire and pain and transformed them all into weapons of liberation, about brands that became blessings, about scars that became stars lighting the way to freedom. The song spread like wildfire, carried in voices that couldn't be silenced, burned into hearts that couldn't be owned, passed down through generations who would remember long after the last chain was broken and the last plantation burned that some spirits are forged in fires too hot for any earthly flame to match. Ashley of the red-hot iron walked on through the night, carrying her message toward the next plantation, the next group of souls waiting to hear that freedom wasn't something you begged for or bought. It was something you claimed with your own two hands, something you made real with your own burning heart. The year was 1857 when Ashley of the red-hot iron walked into New Orleans, and by then her name was known from the bayous of Louisiana to the rice fields of South Carolina. Known and feared by masters, loved and whispered by slaves, carried on tongues that spoke in dozen different languages brought from across the dark water. New Orleans was different from the plantation country Ashley had been walking through. Here, slavery wore different faces. House servants dressed fine as their masters. Quadroon women who lived like wives to white men who could never marry them. Free people of color who owned shops and houses but still felt the weight of chains they'd never worn. It was a place where freedom and bondage danced together like lovers in a complicated waltz, where the line between owned and owning got blurred by money and bloodline, and the strange arithmetic of how much African blood made you property and how much white made you human. But beneath all the sophistication, beneath the fancy dress and the French language and the café society, the same fire burned that Ashley had seen everywhere else, the fire of souls that knew they wasn't free, even when papers said they was. She came walking down Chartres Street in the early morning, when the mist was still rising off the river and the city was just waking up from its dreams of grandeur. Came walking barefoot as always, wearing nothing but the simple dress that covered her constellation of scars, carrying nothing but the message that lived in her branded flesh. The first person to see her was a young Creole woman named Marie Laveau, not the famous voodoo queen who would come later, but her grandmother, an old woman who sold herbs and readings from a shop near the market. When Marie saw Ashley walking down the street, something in her ancient bones told her that change was coming, that the spirits were moving, that the ancestors had sent someone to stir up the settled dust of the city's comfortable compromises. "Child," Marie called out, stepping from her shop into the morning light. "Child, you carrying heavy medicine. You carrying spirits I ain't felt since my grandmother crossed over from Guinea." Ashley stopped, looked at the old woman with eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow and strength of Africa herself. "Yes, grandmother," she said respectful. I carry medicine made from iron and fire, spirits forged in the furnace of human cruelty. I carry message for any ears willing to hear it. Marie beckoned her closer, and when Ashley approached, the old woman gasped. Not at the scars. She'd seen plenty of those in her long life, but at what lived in them, what burned behind them like stars being born in the darkness of space. "Lord, have mercy," Marie whispered, reaching out to trace a brand on Ashley's arm. "These ain't just marks. These is doorways, passages, roads between this world and the next." Ashley nodded slow. "Every brand is a lesson. Every scar is a teaching. Every mark is a memory of how much fire a human soul can hold before it transforms into something the world ain't never seen before." Word of Ashley's arrival spread through New Orleans like fever through a crowded ward. By noon, folks was gathering outside Marie Laveau's shop. Slaves and free blacks, Creoles and Caribbeans, house servants who spoke perfect French and field hands whose tongues still carried the rhythms of Africa. They came to see the woman whose scars glowed, whose presence made the very air shimmer with possibility. But Ashley didn't speak to them that day, didn't preach or testify or tell stories of liberation. Instead, she asked Marie Laveau to teach her about the spirits of New Orleans, about the Loa and Oryxes that had found new homes in this strange city, where cultures mixed like ingredients in a gumbo pot. "The spirits here is different," Marie explained as they walked through the French Quarter. They learned to hide behind Catholic saints, learned to speak in French and Spanish as well as the old tongues. They learned to work with what they found instead of fighting what they couldn't change. Ashley listened, but she could feel something stirring in the branded patterns on her skin, something that recognized the power in this place, but wanted to add its own voice to the chorus. "They learned to survive," she said, "but survival ain't the same as freedom. Compromise ain't the same as justice." That night, in the hidden places where voodoo practitioners gathered, where the old religions lived alongside the new, Ashley stood before a crowd of believers and showed them what she carried. Not just scars, but power. Not just pain, but purpose. Not just suffering, but the strength to transform that suffering into something that could change the world. "Your spirits is beautiful," she told them, her voice carrying across the candle-lit room like wind across water. "Your traditions is strong. Your magic is real. Your ancestors is proud. But they sent me here to tell you something, to remind you that all the hiding and compromising and making do ain't gonna set you free. Freedom comes when you stop asking permission to be human and start demanding the respect that's already yours." An old man in the crowd, a root doctor who'd been practicing longer than Ashley had been alive, stood up with challenge in his eyes. "Easy words, daughter. But this city got ways of dealing with folks who demand too much. Got ways of making troublemakers disappear into the swamps where the gators don't ask questions." Ashley smiled, and her scars began to glow soft in the candlelight. "Then I guess we better make sure the message spreads faster than they can make messengers disappear. I guess we better plant seeds deep enough that even if they cut down the tree, the roots keep growing." She walked to the center of the room, and as she moved, every candle flame leaped higher, every shadow danced wilder, every spirit seemed to lean in close to hear what she had to say. "I've been branded near 200 times, Ashley said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Been marked with iron hot enough to melt steel. Been tortured in ways that should have killed any normal person. But you know what I learned?" She held up her arms, let them see the constellation of scars that covered her flesh, like a map of pain transformed into power. "I learned that some souls was made to burn without being consumed. I learned that fire don't always destroy. Sometimes it purifies, sometimes it transforms. Sometimes it forges something stronger than what was there before." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word, feeling something ancient stirring in their bones, something that remembered freedom from before they learned to compromise with bondage. Every spirit in this room, every ancestor watching from the other side, every Loa and Orisha that found home in your hearts, they all waiting for the same thing. They waiting for y'all to stop hiding your power and start using it. They waiting for y'all to stop asking the oppressor for permission and start taking what was always yours to take. She paused, looked around the room at faces that were beginning to shine with something that might have been hope, might have been recognition, might have been the first stirrings of revolutionary fire. "Tomorrow, Ashley announced. "Tomorrow I'm gonna walk to Congo Square at noon, when the white folks is having their lunch and thinking they safe from any disturbance. Tomorrow I'm gonna stand where your ancestors danced, where they kept the old ways alive even in chains, and I'm gonna call on every spirit, every ancestor, every power that ever fought for freedom." The old root doctor stepped forward again, but this time his face held respect instead of challenge. "And what you planning to do when you call them, daughter? What you planning to ask for?" Ashley's smile was bright as sunrise, terrible as Judgment Day. "I'm planning to ask them to show this city what real power looks like. I'm planning to ask them to remind every slave owner, every overseer, every person who thinks they can buy and sell human souls that some things can't be owned, some spirits can't be chained, some fires burn too bright to ever be put out." She turned toward the door, but before she left, she spoke one more time, her voice carrying the promise of prophecy. "And I'm planning to show every person in this city, black and white, slave and free, that the age of compromise is over. The time of asking politely for basic human dignity is done. From tomorrow forward, freedom ain't gonna be something you beg for. It's gonna be something you claim with your own two hands and make real with your own burning heart." Outside, the spirits of New Orleans stirred in their hidden places, called by something they recognized, awakened by a voice that spoke their language of power and transformation. The ancestors smiled in their eternal rest, knowing that the child they'd been waiting for had finally come home to claim her inheritance. And in the slave quarters throughout the city, folks lay awake listening to something they couldn't name, but could feel in their bones. The sound of change coming like thunder in the distance, like liberation walking through the streets wearing scars like badges of honor, like freedom itself getting ready to set the world on fire. Congo Square at noon was usually a place of controlled celebration, where slaves was allowed to gather on Sundays to dance and sing and remember something of what they'd been before the ships brought them across the dark water. But on this particular day, it felt different, charged with electricity, heavy with anticipation, like the air before a storm that would change everything. Ashley walked into the square wearing the same simple dress, carrying the same message, but something had shifted during the night. The spirits Marie Laveau had told her about was awake now, stirring in the place where cultures met and mixed, adding their voices to the choir of ancestors that sang in Ashley's branded flesh. White folks lined the balconies of the surrounding buildings, drawn by curiosity about the woman they'd heard whispers of, the scarred negress who was causing such a stir among their property. They came expecting entertainment, maybe a little primitive dancing, certainly nothing that would challenge their comfortable assumptions about the natural order of things. They was wrong. Ashley stood in the center of the square, and as she raised her arms to begin, every scar on her body began to glow. Not the soft light they usually gave off, but something brighter, fiercer, more intense. Light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of drums that wasn't there, that danced to music only she could hear. "Spirits of this place," she called out, her voice carrying across the square and up to the balconies where white faces watched in growing unease. "Spirits of Africa and Haiti, of Cuba and Jamaica, of every shore that felt the touch of chained feet and broken hearts, I call on you now." The air began to shimmer like heat rising from summer pavement. The very ground seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. And from somewhere that might have been memory or might have been the space between worlds, drums began to beat. Not physical drums. These was spirit drums, ancestor drums, drums that beat in the blood and bones of every person in that square who carried African heritage in their veins. The white folks on the balconies looked around confused, hearing something they couldn't identify, feeling something they couldn't understand. But the black folks in the square, Lord have mercy. The black folks began to move. Not the careful, controlled movements they was allowed on Sundays, but something older, wilder, more true. They moved like their grandmamas had moved in the forests of Guinea, like their great-granddaddies had moved on the shores of Senegal before the ships came to steal them away. Ashley's scars blazed brighter as more and more people joined the dance, as the spirit drums beat louder, as the very foundations of the city seemed to tremble with power that had been sleeping too long, waiting too patient for its moment to wake. "Too long," Ashley shouted, her voice rising above the phantom drumbeat, above the shuffle of feet and the whisper of spirits moving through dimensions. "Too long we've been asking permission to be human. Too long we've been apologizing for existing. Too long we've been making ourselves small so other folks can feel big. The dance was spreading now, moving beyond Congo Square into the streets of the French Quarter, as slaves working in the big houses heard the drums and felt the pull of something deeper than duty, stronger than fear. House servants dropped their silver and followed the sound. Field hands left their tools and walked toward the music. Children slipped away from their masters and ran toward the square where freedom was being born. On the balconies, white folks was starting to panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Their property wasn't supposed to abandon work, wasn't supposed to move with such purpose, such unity, such complete disregard for the rules that kept society functioning the way it was supposed to function. "Stop this!" shouted Mayor Preston, pushing through the crowd on his balcony to get a better view. Someone stop this before it spreads. But it was already spreading. The spirit drums was calling to every black heart in New Orleans, and Hearts was answering. In the Garden District, in the Marigny, in every corner of the city where African souls lived in bondage, or in the complicated freedom of being free but not equal, folks felt the pull and started moving toward Congo Square. Ashley stood in the center of it all, her arms raised like a conductor directing an orchestra of liberation, her scars blazing like stars being born in the darkness. Around her, the dance grew wilder, more joyful, more powerful. This wasn't rage, it was pure celebration, pure expression of souls that had been compressed too long finally being allowed to expand. "This is who you are," Ashley called out to the dancers, to the spirits, to the ancestors watching from the other side. "This is who you was before they told you what you had to be. This is the power they've been afraid of, the fire they've been trying to put out, the light they've been trying to hide." Mayor Preston was shouting orders to the city guard, but when the soldiers tried to enter Congo Square, something strange happened. Their weapons felt too heavy to lift. Their feet moved like they was walking through molasses. Some of them, the ones with African blood hidden in their family trees, found themselves drawn into the dance instead of trying to stop it. The white folks on the balconies was trapped between fear and fascination, watching something they'd never seen before. Their property moving with dignity, with purpose, with a kind of beauty that challenged every assumption they'd ever made about the natural inferiority of the African race. "Dear God," whispered Mrs. Beauregard, clutching her husband's arm as she watched her house slaves dancing with abandon in the square below. "What is she?" But Ashley heard the question, looked up at the balconies with eyes that burned brighter than her scars, and answered in a voice that carried to every corner of the square and beyond. "I am the sum of every ancestor who died in chains but kept their spirit free," she called out. "I am the daughter of every woman who birthed children into bondage but taught them to dream of liberation. I am the sister of every soul who was broken by this world but refused to let breaking become bending." She turned in a slow circle, addressing every face, every spirit, every power that was present in that moment. "I am Ashley of the red-hot iron, and I carry in my flesh the proof that some things can't be owned, some fires can't be put out, some truths can't be silenced, no matter how hard you try." The drums reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city. The dance reached a peak of joy and power that made the air itself sing with possibilities. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than the ocean, heavier than lead. In that silence, every person in Congo Square, black and white, slave and free, believer and skeptic, understood that something fundamental had changed. The old rules didn't apply anymore. The old agreements was broken. The old way of doing things was over. Ashley lowered her arms, and her scars dimmed to their usual gentle glow. Around her, the dancers stood still, but they stood different than they had before. Straighter, prouder, more aware of their own power and beauty. "Remember this day," Ashley said, quiet, but her voice carried to every ear. "Remember how it felt to move free, to dance without permission, to be fully yourselves without apology. Remember that this power lives inside you always, not just when spirits is stirring, not just when drums is beating, but every moment of every day." She began walking toward the edge of the square, and as she moved, people stepped aside to let her pass. But they didn't bow their heads, didn't cast their eyes down. For the first time in their lives, Many of them looked directly at the white faces on the balconies, met their gaze straight on, claimed their right to exist in the same world as equals instead of property. "Where are you going?" called out Marie Laveau, following Ashley to the square's edge. Ashley turned back one last time, smiled at the old root worker with infinite tenderness. "I'm going where the spirits send me next," she said, "going to plant more seeds, wake more sleepers, remind more folks that freedom ain't something you get, it's something you are." As she walked away from Congo Square, the phantom drums began to fade, but they didn't disappear entirely. They settled into the rhythm of heartbeats, into the cadence of breathing, into the pulse of life itself. From that day forward, every black person in New Orleans would carry those drums inside them, would remember the moment when they danced free and unafraid under the blazing scars of Ashley of the red hot iron. Behind her, the square slowly emptied as folks returned to their lives. But they returned different, changed, awakened to possibilities they'd never imagined before. The slaves went back to their quarters knowing they was more than property. The free blacks went back to their shops knowing they deserved more than tolerance. And on the balconies, white folks stood in stunned silence, finally understanding that the world they'd built on the backs of others wasn't as solid as they'd thought, wasn't as permanent as they'd believed, wasn't as righteous as they'd convinced themselves it was. Change was coming to New Orleans. Change was coming to the South. Change was coming to America itself, carried on the scarred back of a woman who'd learned to transform suffering into strength, brands into blessings, pain into power that couldn't be denied or defeated. The drums still echoed in the distance, calling other cities, other squares, other hearts that was ready to remember what freedom felt like. Years passed like pages in a book of blood and fire, and Ashley of the red-hot iron became something more than woman, more than legend, more than the sum of all the pain that had been poured into her flesh. She became a force of nature, a walking testament to the unbreakable power of the human spirit, a living proof that some truths can't be silenced, no matter how many irons burn them into skin. The war came, just like the ancestors had whispered it would. Came with thunder and lightning, with blue and gray armies marching across the land like Judgment Day made manifest. Came with promises of freedom that some folks believed and others knew was just another kind of chain, painted pretty to look like liberation. Ashley walked through it all, through battlefields where brothers killed brothers, through contraband camps where freed slaves huddled together wondering what freedom really meant, through burned plantations where the ashes of the old world mixed with the hopes of the new. Everywhere she went, her message was the same. True freedom ain't something somebody gives you. It's something you claim with your own hands and make real with your own burning heart. The brands on her body had changed over the years. Not in number. She still carried every mark that Jonas Blackwood had burned into her flesh, but in meaning. What had once been symbols of ownership had become something else entirely. A constellation of power, a map of transformation, a testament to the alchemy that could turn suffering into strength. When the war ended, and the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, folks expected Ashley to settle down, to rest, to enjoy the freedom that had finally been declared from Washington. But Ashley knew what many didn't want to admit, that paper freedom and real freedom was two different things entirely, that changing laws was easier than changing hearts, that the fight for true liberation was just beginning. She was in South Carolina when the news came, standing in a field that had once grown cotton with slave labor, but now lay fallow, waiting for someone to figure out what freedom looked like when it had to pay wages. The former slaves who worked the land gathered around her as she spoke about the road ahead, about the challenges that would come with Reconstruction, about the need to stay strong when the world tried to convince them that they was free enough, equal enough, human enough. Freedom ain't a destination, Ashley told them, her voice carrying across the field like wind through wheat. Freedom is a journey, a daily choice, a commitment you make every morning when you wake up and decide what kind of person you're gonna be. A young man in the crowd, his name was Daniel, and he'd been born into slavery but would die a free man, raised his hand with a question. "Miss Ashley, what happens now? What happens to your message when slavery is over? What happens to your mission when the chains is broken?" Ashley smiled, and her scars glowed gentle in the afternoon light. "Chains come in many forms, child. Iron chains, paper chains, chains made of words and laws and customs that tell folks they ain't worthy of the same respect as everybody else. My mission don't end until every soul on this earth understands that they carry the same fire I carry, the same power to transform pain into purpose, suffering into strength. She gestured toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set over land that had seen too much sorrow but was ready for new hope. I've been walking this road for 30 years now, been carrying this message from plantation to plantation, quarter to quarter, heart to heart, and I'm going to keep walking until every person who needs to hear it has heard it, until every soul that's been told they ain't worthy has remembered their true worth. As evening approached, Ashley prepared to leave, as she always did. Never stayed in one place too long, never let folks start thinking she belonged to them instead of to the message itself. But before she went, she did something she'd never done before. She removed her simple dress and stood before them naked except for her scars. The brands covered her from head to toe now, hundreds of marks that told the story of every plantation she'd visited, every soul she'd touched, every heart she'd awakened. They glowed like stars in the gathering darkness, like a constellation of hope written in flesh and fire. "Look at me," Ashley said, her voice carrying the authority of prophecy. "Look at these scars and remember what they teach. Remember that pain can be transformed, that wounds can become wisdom, that suffering can become strength if you let it." She raised her arms, and every brand blazed brighter, until she looked like a figure made of light itself, like an angel forged in the furnace of human cruelty, but never consumed by it. "I am Ashley of the red-hot iron," she declared, her voice echoing across the field and beyond, carrying on the wind to every ear that needed to hear it. "I am the woman who took 200 brands and turned them into blessings. I am the daughter of Africa who learned to dance with fire, the sister of sorrow who chose joy, the child of bondage who claimed freedom for herself and every soul that came after." She lowered her arms and the glow faded to its usual gentle radiance. As she dressed again, she spoke final words that would be remembered long after she was gone. "My story ends here, but yours is just beginning. Take what I've given you, plant it deep in your hearts, water it with your dreams, and let it grow into whatever freedom you can imagine. Because freedom, real freedom, ain't limited by what others think you deserve. It's only limited by what you dare to dream for yourselves." With that, Ashley walked away into the gathering darkness, her scarred feet silent on the earth that had known so much pain, but was ready for healing. Behind her, the former slaves stood in the field, feeling something new stirring in their hearts, something that would grow and spread and transform everything it touched. She was never seen again, though stories of her continued to surface for years afterward. Some said she walked north to help the newly freed slaves learn to read and write. Others claimed she went west with the Buffalo Soldiers, carrying her message to the frontier. Still others swore she returned to Africa, going home to the land of her ancestors to plant the seeds of liberation in the soil where her people first learned to dream of freedom. But the truth is simpler and more profound than any of the legends. Ashley of the red-hot iron became what she had always been meant to become. Not a person, but a principle. Not a body, but a belief. Not a woman, but a way of understanding that some lights can't be put out, some truths can't be denied, some spirits can't be broken no matter what the world throws at them. Her scars became stars in the constellation of freedom, guiding other souls who found themselves lost in darkness toward the light of their own unbreakable power. Her message became medicine for hearts that had been wounded by the world's cruelty, teaching them that wounds could heal into wisdom, pain could transform into purpose. And today, generations later, when folks gather to tell stories of courage and resistance, of transformation and triumph, they still speak her name, still remember the woman who took iron and fire and turned them into instruments of liberation, still carry in their hearts the truth she died to share. That freedom ain't something you get, it's something you are, and no power on earth can take it away from a soul that refuses to be owned, who suffered, who resisted, left memory, and memory we keep here in the legends of the lost slave quarters. Those that fell ain't forgotten, those that fought still walk among us, and their voices echo here, still singing, still testifying, still bearing witness here, in the legends of the lost slave quarters. The whip silenced many voices, but not all, and the ones that resisted still speak, still chant, still give testimony here, in the legends of the lost slave quarters.